All right, today we're going to take a look at Against the Wind. This is a game by Cezar Capale, who is a Brazilian game designer and whose game Nexalis I covered in a previous video, this game. And these two games are kind of spiritually related to each other, I think, as I will talk about, as was Nexalis. Against the Wind is a mechanics light, almost journaling game is what it boils down to. I think I would describe it as a journaling game kind of plus in a sense, as we'll see. And it is designed to be played solo or co-op. It is a fantasy adventure sandbox game in a land ravaged by fierce winds and biting cold, all infused with a subtle pinch of fairy tale ambience. In this world, players step into the roles of magical nomad heroes, confronting the relentless climate, traversing diverse landscapes, and following their own unique paths. It blends traditional and modern styles, merging the classic elements of fantasy adventure, like wilderness exploration and dungeon delving, with contemporary narrative-driven mechanics and procedures. And indeed, that is the case. It is a game where you are actually creating your own world, and as the designer says in the game, it is intentionally left very much open to you as to what your actual world is. And there's an inspiration table here, or inspiration listing here, including Ironsworn and Mythic Bastionland. Those are the ones that stand out to me and as being very clearly, and to some extent, maze rats. There's a lot of tables. There's a lot of interpretive work to be done by the player, and work in the good sense of the word work. That is part of the actual gameplay, is to interpret the tables and to create your story. There are game mechanics, and we'll take a look at them. They're pretty light, and as I would argue and as we'll discuss, I think you could almost completely ignore them and still have a very, not only effective, but almost like what the designer intends play experience. And before we get into looking at that, I just want to flip through a little bit and show you some of the gorgeous art that is in the book, and it does help to give a real feel and flavor for the kind of whimsical nature of this world that you will be creating. It is a world of icy winds and abandoned temples, and really could be shipwrecked sailors. You could be traveling along the coast. You can be hearing whispers from the landscape that will call you to adventure. And here we have the section on delving. You could also, if you wish to, use the many tables that are in the book to create something that is more traditional of a delve. You could as well wander through the land and then find a place to go delving into. There's a second book, which is the Book of Tables, and this is not needed for gameplay. These just reproduce the tables that are in the main book, in just the table book. I think it's particularly useful, and it made gameplay for me a lot easier to flip around these tables. And you could see here from the titles, unfortunately in the title page, or the table of contents here in the tables, it's not so clearly listed, but there are these headers, so you can see here what types of tables you have: events, discoveries, people, buildings, encounters of rooms, hazards, rewards. And obviously you could use this material for other games if you wanted to. Delving tables, there's just a wealth of material here. Monsters, exploration, encounters, beasts, people. There's the type of, here's a basic oracle table. Let us now, though, turn to back to the main game here to just take a quick look at what the the rules of the game are and actually how it works, because it's a pretty unique system here. The principles, it's a sandbox, it's GM-less, abstract, it's also procedural, so that it combines some specific procedures that will allow you to then have a very general and open experience. But the first thing you're doing before anything else is you have to create your own world. And there is a very clear procedure for doing so that I'm not going to so much get into. This is the world that I created using the procedure here. And you make the world and then you travel in the world. So after I made this world, I decided I was going to start at the place I named Shadow Heart, and my character was going to be there. And then I turned to the tables in the book to roll up the environment and the feeling of the environment, which then started me on the story. Because what I rolled up descriptively was that it was a place that had rolling hills, and it was in the sort of overnight, but the mood was harmonious, and that nature was whispering to us in a pleasant way, and that there were glimpses of the world's magic in the area. And so that kind of gave me the feeling of the place and helped me to determine what was actually going to happen when I rolled on the next tables that I rolled on, which caused me to encounter an individual, an NPC. So the game very much works in that manner, that you are, again, from the beginning of the prompts to roll dice and to therefore create the shapes of your world and map it out. And I gave my world some names. Now, these names did not come from this book. It does say here that you should be creating names that are sort of thematic. I think it would have been useful for to have tables with some of those prompts. Those aren't here, but you could easily find that yourself. There's a series of tables that take you through what is in your world. What's the technology level? What are the communities like? What happens with justice in this world? So in my world, for example, conflicts are frequent, but they're localized battles. The religion, they're revered traditions and integrated faiths. And then later on, I rolled up that they are the beliefs, that they worshiped entities, that they're central to their practice of religion. And as such, when I began my story, I had made this area the Sacramento Hills, and I decided that once the story got going, and we'll talk about how that happened later, that the first thing that was going to happen is that my characters were going to travel to these sentimental hills to sort of make an offering to their gods, because that went in line with basically the conditions of the world that I rolled up. And all of these came directly from the rule set. So you roll on these tables to find out, well, what are the monsters like? Well, the monsters in my world are widespread, they're bold, and they're aggressive. And the conceit of this game is that, as it says here, it's called Against the Wind, that there are these winds that are traveling through the world, and there's even a table to ask what the origins of the wind are. So in my world, they are divine or magical creations, and they are possibly some sort of tied to some forgotten ritual that has gone awry. So the game begins with the creation of your actual world and the constraints that are in your world. The other thing I didn't mention, and I showed, is this is a 2d6 based game. So every single table is going to be between 2 and 12, and you just need the 2d6 to play. And that is it in terms of the dice. You don't need any other dice to deal with any of the other tables. So the characters that you play are made of two different things: resources and traits. Resources are reserves that you have, and you will be spending these resources to accomplish your tasks and to really to attain successes if the die rolling that you do is not enough. And then you have traits, and traits are things about your character that will be like items and things they carry and weapons they have, and you can use your resources to use the traits as well. So the resources are listed here, and you do you're assigning, you're rolling d6s and assigning just a single value to those traits. So in the case of my character, I rolled my dice. My character was Thal the Herbalist, who was a bone witch, and you just get these single values here, and you are instructed that you can re-roll some results, and it says that the maximum reserve is 6. And it says, don't worry if you roll a low number. It doesn't really matter for your character. It just informs your current circumstances, and it encourages you to bring these into the story. So you have things like vigor, which is your physical prowess, resolve, like mind and willpower. Essence is your connection to invisible forces, kind of related to magic. Talents or abilities and training. Gear is for using equipment and devices, and something called factor, which is your current circumstances and overall assets at your disposal. It includes the surrounding environment, momentum, information you have, basically kind of like where you're standing in the world. So to determine your starting situation, these are tables. Now, you do not roll on these tables. They're, I think, the only tables in the book you don't roll on, because what you do is once you've rolled your numbers for the resources that you have, you refer to the table based on the number you have. So, for example, my vigor started at 4. That's my body and physical prowess. And then as such, the sort of background or starting situation I have is that I had been in training with mountain monks and it honed my agility. My resolve is 3, and that means that I have a newfound purpose discovered in the ruins of old kings. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but we can see here there's a designer's note, and there are designer notes throughout the book, which I think are very useful and I appreciated, because they give insight not only to what the designer himself was thinking, but also they may give you ideas for your own play. So this just says that these are suggestions. They are helpful if you feel you need a little push to get your story moving, but they might sound too confined if you want to just start with a blank slate. And he says, I suggest you take note of the results on the journal and then integrate them gradually into your story. So that's kind of exactly what I did down here. And I did find that it became useful because, as we'll see, the mechanics of this game, this is really interpretive, that even when you are following the die rolling and the use of the game mechanics, it's so much open to your own interpretation. So what are those mechanics? Well, those mechanics are that I'm going to skip over this for a moment to get to the actual, it's called the game machine here. And we have a narrative table that's referred to as the core of the game machine. Again, it's prompts, it's generic, it's rolling on this for not only a yes or no, but to get sort of word pairings that you would then interpret. And there's useful examples here. So for example, the designer shows you, if you ask the question, how does the mysterious sage answer to my warning? You get these words, light, still, and grand, and then you get what the interpretation of that could be. These are just examples to get you going. What do I know about this ancient book? Shadow, decay, close. So these are all coming from this particular table. And that is the oracle table. But when do you turn to that? How do the mechanics work? So what you're doing to do something in the game is you're rolling 2d6 and you are summing the total of it. So there, I got a 6. On a 10 or higher, it's a hit. A hit means this isn't just combat. It means kind of any success, anything that you're trying to do going as you wanted it to go, finding the right direction, locating the thing, opening the chest, whatever it might be. So if that happens, you describe the favorable outcome and what happens next. If you get a 9 or lower, as I did, it's a miss. So things don't go as you expected. However, if you get that miss, you have the option to make an effort. And that is the key and really like the only, in a sense, mechanic of the game, which is to burn your resources in any combination such that you bring your result up to a 10. So in the case of this example, I think I said I rolled a 6, I'm 4 short of a success. So I have to burn 4 resources in any combination to make this into a hit. But you can't just strike off the numbers of your well, you can do whatever you want, of course, but the point isn't just to say, well, I'll take 1 from vigor and 1 from resolve and 1 from essence and 1 from talent, and I get to the 4. It's meant to be narratively incorporated. So, for example, here it is, you're going to say like, well, I'm trying to read this book, for example, and I need to be able to read this book. Well, what am I using of myself in order to do that? And how am I getting those 4 resources from myself in order to successfully interpret what is in the book? And it will give you the examples here. So, for example, a talent is to apply your specialized knowledge or skills for that. And you are also, the other thing that you have are these what's called traits. And the traits here are aspects of your character that help you envision what you're like. And it says here, so your traits are not everything that your character has. It's what it says it represents your highlights, things that have more narrative impact and can be leveraged for your benefit. And leveraging is the second real big mechanical aspect of this game. And essentially what it allows you to do is, so if you roll the dice, again, you're trying to get a 10. So we roll the dice and here we got an 8. If you don't like what you got, you can leverage your action with a trait. So you select the trait that you think is going to be most applicable to the scenario, the situation that you're in. So for example, we'll take a look at my character. So Fall the Herbalist Bone Witch, these are a list of her traits. She has, for example, the gift of shape-shifting. She has arcane knowledge is a skill. She has a quirk that she befriends animals. So let's just say, for example, we had our roll here. It was, I believe it was a 6 and a 2, and we are traveling. And in our travels, we feel that we might be getting lost or something, and there is an animal nearby. Well, we could leverage our trait. So we could select the trait that is most applicable and burn a resource that's relevant to that. So for example, let's say there's an animal and we want, the animal is going to be telling us the way because we have our essence. We're going to say we're using our essence, our connection to invisible forces or magical forces here. That is our essence. And we're going to be using this resource. So what we're going to do in this particular case, we would burn the resource. So we would bring the 3 down to the 2. And then we would leverage this trait. And what it would mean is, instead of giving us the value of 10, it would allow us to double the highest value that we have. And in this case, that's a 6. So that would bring us to 12. That would then get us a success after that. And it says if we still didn't reach the hit after that, we could make an effort to supplement the result. So there's different ways of it amounts to the same thing, which is changing the values on your dice to get to a 10. But in this particular case, it's thematically using a trait to leverage something, leverage an asset that you have, and then using a resource, a burning resource that's relevant to that trait in order to get there. And so as you can see, it is really almost completely up to your own discretion as to what you use or when you use it. Well, you may wonder, if I'm using up my resources, when do I restore them? When do they come back? So per the game, there is a rest action that you can take that will bring you back to all the resources that you had. So your resources are going to go down and then they'll come back. But the reality is, it's again up to you to decide when you would take that rest. Now, thematically, you could decide to have time passing in a certain amount of days, and then at the end of a day you would have to rest, make camp. Perhaps that in and of itself would become sort of a challenge, and yet there is not a built-in way to force that to happen. So you could just essentially game the game by, when you diminished all your resources, to continue to give yourself successes, say, well, now I'm going to rest and they're all going to come back. I didn't play that way because it does kind of take out the inherent tension that you, I think, want as a player, that rules will give you in order to make there be some, well, as I said, tension or pressure or a sense of diminishing. I'm getting tired. I'm running out of time or whatever. I'm running out of strength because I keep needing to burn my resources to get the successes that I want. If I'm not getting the successes, to deal with the negative consequences of it. So the concept of challenges, it says, are things like, it's called scenarios, or things that you do that require more than a single action to resolve. They can include obstacles, enigmas, negotiations, contest battles, and so on. So if a task is too complex to be overcome with a single roll, it becomes a challenge. So in my case, for example, the first challenge that I defined for my character was they met up with a mystic, and the mystic that they met up with was their former, somebody that had trained them and was in need of help. And so I decided, as mentioned, that they were going to need to be traveling over to the Sacramento Hills, and that in and of itself, that first portion was going to become a challenge. So I defined its concept that way. And then the challenge was going to possess two attributes, a maneuver and endurance, and it ranges from 1 to 6. And it says you can either set these or roll 2d6. Now, I rolled 2d6 for that, and I ended up with a 5 and a 6. So I assigned the values as they suggest here. 1 is the maneuver that reflects the challenge's ability to alter the playing field. I gave that a 6 because it was integral to my story that they get to the Sacramento Hills. And then endurance is basically how many successes it's going to take to overcome the challenge. So in that case, I had 5. So I used the procedures of the game to say that I needed to do 5 different things in order to succeed and get to the Sacramento Hills. And that getting to the Sacramento Hills in my game was also the only time I could rest. So I wasn't doing day and night per se, but it was the amount of the challenges that I needed to use in order to, before I could rest. And so there's different ways in the game that you can determine this in terms of what you're actually doing. And you have the procedures outlined here, and they are for exploration. You have your starting location. I just decided where I was going to be, and then you roll on tables. And this is, again, the core way, the generation of the story is the rolling on the tables. So in my case, I was on land, so I rolled on the land table. Now, I'm not going to show you too much about the tables here because I showed you at the beginning of the video how many there are, and indeed you can see that, again, this is not necessary, but the adjunct, the book of tables, there's a lot of tables, and they're very interconnected. So I found as I was rolling on them that I would get things that would allow it to kind of work together in a way. And that, I think, is the design showing through, so that this isn't just actually just random anything, but it creates a cohesive world, albeit one that you are going to be generating from what amount to prompts. In any case, you then go and you roll on your event, and it's going to be a certain type of event. My first event was an encounter with somebody, and then I rolled on more tables to see who that person was. And then I asked the oracle, how am I related to that person? And I got some prompts for that. And it ended up being this wandering mystic who was distracted and cursed and had a secret, and his goal was that he needed to escape a pursuer. And then coming out of all of that, I developed a story that we needed to get to the Sacramental Hills to perform this ritual as the first thing we needed to do. And it says here that the event tables determine what they are, but not how you should deal with them. So it says you can decide to ignore it and move on. You can handle it without die rolling. You can make it a single action, or you can make an entire challenge out of it. And again, this is what I have to stress about this game. It allows you as the player, or really asks of you as the player, to do the work to decide how you're going to play the game. And so it says, if you decide on a challenge, you make it a challenge and you follow those rules to kind of elongate what it is that you are doing, and then within that create the details to actually do it. Or you could just have it be a single action. So when I encountered the wandering mystic, it could have just been basically essentially saying like, hi, and moving on. Or it could have been, I could have decided that it was going to be some type of conflict and I needed to kill him and steal what he had. Or in the case of this, I decided to roll on some tables to develop, well, who is this person? Why is he here? What does he want? What's his relation to me? And then that became my story. So it is extremely left up to you as the player with the support of all of the tables. And then it says you're going to deal with the event in the manner in which you chose and decide what to do next. And then again, it says if you get into trouble, you could just spend time to do your recovery and camping rules. And I didn't really show these, but in essence, what you're doing is if you decide you're going to be recovering, you're rolling on this table, you're getting a value here, and I rolled an 11. I get to recover 3d6 resources. So, that's, in that case, that could be all my resources totally fully back. So it's again, up to you, and as to how much tension there will be, how close to the end of your resources, if you're running out of resources, you're dying, you're going to let yourself get. And that is where the journaling aspect also comes in, because to really develop the story out of the prompts, you are creating a narrative for yourself. I didn't spend time writing an entire paragraph by paragraph story. I took the prompts, I made a sentence or two or some phrases, maybe made some diagrams to outline the connections, and really worked off of my map. And then when I got to the Sacramental Hills, things happened. And what ended up happening was that we needed to travel down ultimately to cross the Beggar's Crossing and get to this shattered stone lake, because there was a relic that was found, and the relic needed to be re-imbued with magical energy, which through a series of die rolling and my own imagination, I said was at the shattered stone lake. And that was my story. That became what the entire session was about. Again, all of that coming out of the prompts in the book, starting with just the entire creation of this whole environment. And when you play this game, you're not going to have Shadowheart and the Sacramental Hills and the Beggar's Crossing and all of that. You're not going to have a world where, in this particular case, the southern area of the world was impoverished, and the northern area had the more lush resources. But this shattered stone lake was the place where some magic was still remained and hanging on and had to be obtained and brought back. That was just my world that I created. Again, based on the really rich tables and prompts that are in this game. And I think it really is so nicely done because it feels very manageable. The use of the 2d6 gives you tables that are short, but they're really plentiful. And you can, as such, sort of flip through and see, even just looking here at the interaction tables with NPCs and things, there's you don't have to automatically encounter someone and then just like start fighting them. It's just very narrative. So there's tactical tables you can roll on, an aggressive table, or a special table for what's going to happen. Maybe the battlefield is going to change. Maybe there is going to be something something suddenly new in the interaction that you're having. And I think that it goes as such a bit deeper than certain games do, especially in a very kind of condensed manner. It goes a bit deeper than certain games do into things that allow nuance. And I think that that's the final message I have here. There is a lot of nuance that is in the game, and that the tables, the prompts allow you to bring to the game so that you feel as you're playing it. It's very immersive, and the immersion comes from, as I said, the level of detail and the options that you're given as a player to bring things into the game that make sense for you and that feel appropriate to the story and the world that you have developed.